We begin by praising and thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who in truth we can never praise and thank enough. I remember Ayatollah Hassan Zadeh Amuli, who is one of the most prominent teachers of mysticism in Qum, and who is in an advanced stage of life. He hasn't passed away yet. He writes that I used to think that I was serving Islam. Obviously, as a scholar, somebody who's teaching many students who would spread the message of Islam all across the world, he was doing great service. And he used to feel happy that, alhamdulillah, I am in the service of the religion of Islam. He says, and then I realized that actually it is Islam that is serving me. I'm the one who's benefiting from all of the actions that I feel like I'm doing in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The truth is that the religion of Islam is serving me. And in the same way, while we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the tawfiq to be able to participate in the majalis of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and that is a great thing, and we have inshallah a great reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as well as the personal development in this world as well. We should be mindful that it is the majalis themselves that are doing our khidmah. It is the majalis that themselves are being that facilitator for us to move forward and for us to gain that great benefit, inshallah, of proximity to Abu Abdullah in this dunya and in the akhirah as well. So continuing from our topic from last time, we started to talk about the Risala Sayr wa Suluk of Bahr al-Ulum, or the treatise on wayfaring by Sayyid Mahdi Bahr al-Ulum. And we started to talk about the stages. And we explained that the stages are based on a Quranic ayah. And that ayah is ayah number 20 of Surah At-Tawbah. And in that ayah, Allah speaks about the people who believe, who emigrate, and who struggle in the way of Allah. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَهَاجَرُوا وَجَاهَدُوا. And then how Sayyid Bahr al-Ulum, he takes these three stages and adds one extra stage, which is the stage of Islam, and treats those four as macro stages. And we also explained that the purpose of us looking at these stages is for us to understand the roadmap, to understand where we are, to understand what is next, and to understand how far really a person can go. So we explained that the first stage was minor Islam. Minor Islam is to profess the Shahadatain, and that is what separates a Muslim from a non-Muslim. And then the second stage was to believe in the Shahadatain, and that is what separates a believer from a hypocrite. Now, of course, hypocrisy is a trait where we profess something or we show something that we don't believe. And it has itself a number of levels. Yes, it is true that when it comes to the Shahadatain and the belief in the Shahadatain, that will separate, if you like, a major hypocrite, or a hypocrite as it comes to, for example, a Quranic definition, and a believer. But hypocrisy is the other side of every stage of belief that we talk about in these stages. Okay, hypocrisy is one of those things that is a deep-rooted trait. In fact, in some of our hadith, it says hypocrisy is like an ant on a dark stone on a dark night. It's something that can be so hidden within a person that it takes time for people to deal with every single level of hypocrisy, because the opposite of hypocrisy is belief, and belief itself is graded as well. It has a number of levels. But this here for now, this is what separates a hypocrite and a believer. Then the next stage was talking about the greater submission. And we said that at that stage, a person deals with all the dilemmas that they have with religion. Now, this is also a process. And what we have to realize is that within the understanding of religion, there are many different perspectives. There is no one perspective that owns the narrative on religion. Yes, of course, we have the objective reality that is religion, but of course, the access to that objective reality is something that is for certain people, like the infallibles. As soon as religion is explained by the infallibles, there then begins the subjective process of the people that hear the message. And throughout history, our ulama have tried their best to understand the message of Islam with the very real limitations that we have. Real limitations such as time, such as distance away from the era of revelation. And as such, we employ a whole range of tools to try and understand Islam. So sometimes when you find that you have a dilemma in your mind that needs a solution, sometimes we shouldn't just settle for the first answer. We should not feel like we have to just accept things as they are told to us. There are a number of different ways of understanding all of the tenets of the religion of Islam. And even when it comes to aqaid, there is whole discussions on every different matter that is available. So a person going on this journey has to truly go on that journey. They have to see and they have to expand and broaden their horizons until they can solve the dilemmas that are within their very existence. And then after that, like we said, the next stage is the greater faith. Because they've solved their dilemmas, they can now put their heart into it. Okay, they can believe in Islam and put their heart into that belief. And then the next stage comes along. So the next stage is what he calls the greater migration. So we've had Islam and Iman, and now we have Hijrah, the greater migration. Now in this stage, what happens is because the person's personality has now been formulated by what they truly believe, they find that not every circle or not every group of people is in line with their own personality. And so what happens is they start to move away from the type of company that includes the attitudes of sin or the aspirations solely of the material world. Okay? So they find that naturally what happens is they start to keep their company with like-minded people. And so he considers this to be a stage in the movement towards perfection, because many times our movement is affected by our surroundings and our company. If you surround yourself with people who are very pessimistic, you'll find that it's sometimes hard to be optimistic. And similarly, if you surround yourself with people who are optimistic, it's sometimes hard to be pessimistic about things. But it's even more basic than that. If you surround yourself with people who eat healthily, you can't help but eat healthily because everybody's eating healthily. Okay? If you surround yourself with people who are motivated and successful, you will find that that rubs off on you as well. So what Sayyid Bahrul Ulum is trying to say here is that the person realizes this kind of basic fact. And it's not just about realization. It is about where they find their personality moving towards. And as such, they start to filter their company such that they are with the company that is conducive to their movement. Now that of course doesn't mean that they don't interact with anybody else, or that they don't, for example, have professional or working relationships with anybody else. What it means is that their company, their true company, and the people that they identify with are a slightly different type of people because they have made those movements and that they're crafted in that way. And what this does then is that this gives space for the next stage. The next stage is the jihad an-nafs. The next stage is the greater struggle. Okay? And we've talked about in detail the strategies of the greater struggle. Okay? This comes after, believing and kind of solving many, many dilemmas. Now you're motivated to really take on the faults within yourself. Okay, now of course that is a very large stage. In fact, what the ulama say is that as long as a person is doing jihad an-nafs, then that itself is an accomplishment and is an achievement. And as you can see, this is the 6th stage, so this is halfway towards the goal. Now within that sphere of jihad an-nafs, then it may take a person a very long time to craft their personality. But the thing is that, again, what is important throughout the whole thing is meaning, tangible movement. So moving along that way, the person is doing the greater jihad. And like we say, a person that does jihad, if they pass away or if they die along the way, then they are considered to be a shaheed. And in this sense, somebody who dies while they are trying to improve themselves, they are considered to be, if you like, a ma'nawi shaheed, or a person who is a martyr in terms of the spiritual side of things. But what we all hope is that the jihad al-nafs does come to an end. The jihad al-nafs continues, but at least a proportion of people will be successful in the jihad al-nafs. And that is the next stage. When somebody has meaningfully changed and sustained their personality development, this finally leads to the stage of success and victory. This he considers it as a stage, okay? Because it is such a major milestone in the path to improvement, but it's not the end. What you'll find is in the books of akhlaq, they talk about different stages. So they talk about takhalli, which means to rid yourself of bad habits. And then they talk about, takhliya, and then they talk about tahliya. Tahliya means to adopt the good traits. And after these two stages, they talk about annihilation or fana. Okay? So immediately from the personality development, it leads on to a very important stage for them. But in this treatise, you find more of an explanation of this path. So after a person has done jihad al-nafs, they have another stage. And this stage he calls the greatest submission. Okay, so we've now had 3 stages of Islam. Okay, 3 stages of submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at the stage of the greatest submission, the wayfarer or the person on the path now is now liberated from their imagination or their illusions, their appetites and their anger, and they're free from the conflicts that are within their mind. Okay, so this is also the level where the nafs is at peace. Okay, because the nafs is not at peace when it's in conflict. So that's why, again, when it comes to this type of way of looking at things, you have the nafs al-ammara, which is against or opposed by the nafs al-lawama, so that the soul as it desires evil versus the soul as it blames itself for desiring evil. And that is like an argument. One side wants to do, the other side doesn't, telling you not to do it. It's like those 2 angels that we see, in the cartoons, where you have one who's pulling you one way and the other one who's pulling you the other way. But once that argument stops, then there's peace in the house. Okay, so at this stage, because the person has gone through this, okay, they are now at this stage, but there is still something that remains, despite this tension now becoming calm. And that is the soul's biggest trap. And Sayyid Bahr al-Ulum emphasizes that this is where most people who are successful fall right back down. So you can imagine, even after all that work, the danger is there. And that's why I said to you, one of the advantages of reading about this literature is to understand where the potholes are. So the biggest trap still remains. What is the biggest trap? The biggest trap is egotism and self-admiration. That is that once they have made all of that effort, they see the result. And what happens? They become blinded by the result. Okay? They admire the real movement that they've made. But that admiration of the real movement that they've made pushes them right down back to the bottom. Okay? So at this stage, what is essential is for the person to realize their own non-existence, their own darkness, and their own poverty. And of course, this is going to be the topic that we're going to move on to. Okay? So that fundamental, if it is not inculcated right from the beginning, then at this stage it comes to hit you. Okay? Right after you've done all of the jihad al-nafs. So now, once a person has done the greatest submission, okay, they then move on to the stage of the greatest faith. So this is now the third stage of faith that we have as well. Now, what happens at this stage? Well, very similar to the previous when we were talking about the submission and the faith, in that the faith then was to bring your heart into it. At this stage, what happens is the wayfarer feels and witnesses their own non-existence. So the problem before was that there was ego. So what they had to do is they had to intellectually hold on to their poverty. Now what they do in the greatest faith is they push past that. Yeah? They push past the intellectual understanding and they move onto that being the stage of truly witnessing it, truly deepening that feeling of poverty, and pushing through the intellectual understanding and making it their reality. Okay? So that requires a conscious effort to keep pushing past that boundary. And it was like I was saying before when I said yesterday, you have to just keep trying until you get there. Even at this stage, a person has to keep trying to make themselves get there. They know what's in their mind. Many times you might hear this: how do you make your knowledge into action? Sometimes you have to push your knowledge into action. Sometimes the truth is that we don't have knowledge, we have information. Because knowledge itself should result in action. So in the same way here, what you have is that you have the information. The person knows in their mind, but they have to make that lived knowledge. Okay, they have to make that lived knowledge and push through until the greatest faith. Now what happens after that? Can there really be anything else after that? There's 3 more stages. Okay? So what else is there? The next thing to do is to perform the greatest migration. So we have 2 stages of migration. This is the second one. What does this mean? This means to migrate completely from their own consciousness of their existence and to be totally focused on the realm of absolute existence, i.e. they are completely absorbed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not such that they don't live in the world, but such that their perspective is completely drowned in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They don't see anything except Allah at all the time. Okay, because they have migrated from the conscious that they have as, if you like, their individuality, and they have moved then into a perspective where all that is there for them is the absolute. All that is there for them is Allah. And of course, at this stage, they live in a paradise on earth because they see that beauty, they see that mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time. But it's still not finished. It's still not finished because they can't do that all at once. There's still traces of individualism. And so they must do the greatest struggle. So we had the Jihad al-Akbar. There's one more struggle after that. And that struggle then is to completely efface all of the traces of individualism until the person can arrive at absolute unity. And then, now, the wayfarer has entered into the realm of sincerity. So you can see the type of movement that needs to occur for a person to become fully sincere. And that is, of course, where all traces of hypocrisy are also wiped out completely. And at this stage now, a person is prepared for a whole new journey, because the journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't stop. In fact, when we talk about the journeys to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's a very famous distinction of the 4 journeys. So this is put forward by Mullah Sadra. He says that, look, the first journey is from the creation to Allah. So the person, they are within the realm of creation, they're within the material realm, and what they need to do is they need to migrate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is basically what we're talking about here. It's that first stage. The next stage, though, is the stage where a person is traversing within the truth, traversing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. okay, or in greater knowledge and understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? And that is a never-ending journey. That's a journey that just never finishes, because of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is completely unlimited. And then for some people, they are then given the responsibility to return back to the creation. So they come from the if you like, from the truth back to creation, and then they are among the creation, while of course they are still making that second journey. Okay, so the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never truly finishes, and it's not supposed to finish. Okay, because we are moving in further and further into the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So of course, linking it back to our discussion, when a person enters the realm of sincerity, they truly see nothing but beauty. And while these stages are sequential, it's possible to be doing part of a stage, yeah, until you fully move into that stage. So you can work on your poverty, yeah, even if you're in the stage of solving your dilemmas, yeah. You can think about your individuality and the manifestation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala everywhere, even if you're still working on other things. So now when we move on to our next topic, which is the topic of essential poverty, okay? Essential poverty, like I said, it's linked to those two last stages of Islam and Iman, the greatest Islam and the greatest Iman. But I want to start our discussion here with a hadith from Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. It says, عن الإمام حسين عليه السلام أنه قال إن الله جل ذكره ما خلق العباد إلا ليعرفوه فإذا عرفوه عبدوه فإذا عبدوه استغنوا بعبادته عن عبادة ما سواه. Which means that surely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, exalted be His remembrance, did not create the servants, i.e. all of us, except that they may know Him. Okay, so this is the place of the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala within our tradition. It is the very purpose of why we're created. And he says, when they know Him, they worship Him. Okay? So like we said in the beginning, even at the beginning of religion, the first step of religion is to have some knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But of course, as that knowledge increases, so does that full attention to that worship. So the greater that knowledge is, the more a person fully turns to that concentration on Allah. Like we saw in that hadith of Amir al-Mu'mineen, which I talked about when we were talking about prayer. Somebody who worships Allah with knowledge is able to fully turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with everything they have. And then the Imam continues, he says, when they worship Him, they become free of worshipping anything other than Him through their worship of Him. So because they are attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and because they worship Him, they are not pulled side to side, okay, to the worship of others. The worship of others here could be something very clear, like worshipping an idol, but it can also be other more subtle things, like for example, chasing after the dunya. Sometimes chasing after the dunya is also called worshipping the dunya, yeah, or worshipping the material life. So it can be more subtle things like that. So when we talk about poverty in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we might all have an idea of our poverty in front of Allah. But what we really need to do is we need to restructure the way we think for us to fully deepen our understanding and our grasp of our poverty in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because like I've said before, how we interpret events, right, is how we form our understanding of the world. And because we are continuously firefighting the onslaught of everything that's sensory, we sometimes interpret the sensory with a certain lens. And that builds up into a sense of ourselves. Okay, and like I said before, this is also what we call the ego. that sense of ourselves that is built up on false information. So that free will and ability can sometimes become a veil to understand. And so in order to see behind this veil, we have to take an intellectual journey to truly understand what is behind our thoughts and actions. So in order to do this, we are going to employ one of the key strategies in philosophical thought. That is something called a thought experiment. Now, what I want you to do is to think to yourself, what do you have that you can lose? Okay? What do you have that you can lose? So, for example, let's say I have my car. Could I lose my car? Yeah, I could lose my car. I could crash the car, or I could just get old and I could lose my car. Okay, what about my possessions, like, my clothes and, my iPad and things like that? Can I lose those? Certainly, I can lose those. Someone takes them, they're gone. Okay, what about the money in my bank account? Can I lose that? Of course I can lose that. In fact, anytime I point to a material thing of mine, I can lose it. What about the family I have, or for example, the friends I have? Can I lose them? Yes, I can lose them too. So what it's showing me is that if I can lose these things, then they're not essential to me. Because I can't lose something that is essential to me. Okay? I can only lose things that are not essential to me, because if I was to lose something that was essential to me, I wouldn't be me anymore. I'd be something else. Okay? So now what about my body? What if I was to lose, for example, my hands? Okay? Or my feet? Yeah? Could I lose my body parts? Yes, I could lose them too. So therefore, since I can lose them, then they're not essential to me. What else could I lose? Could I lose my ability to think? Could I lose my ability to speak? Could I lose my very will? Or my will to do things? As I look, it seems I can lose all of these things. So as I keep thinking about what I can I lose my life? I can lose life. Can I lose knowledge? I can lose knowledge. Can I lose my strength? I can lose my strength. So what exactly do I have to hold on to that I say I definitely can't lose that? Yeah? And as we start to think about this, what we realize is that there isn't anything that we can't lose. We can lose absolutely everything. There's nothing that we can't lose, which means that none of these things about us, which we will call perfections, none of these perfections belong to us. A perfection is something that is good. Okay, so for example, speaking is a perfection. Life is a perfection. Knowledge is a perfection. These are all things that are good, that come with existence. What about our very existence? What about that? Is that essential to us? Can we pop out of existence? Well, yeah, we can pop out of existence as well. So even if our very existence is something that is not essential to us, then how can anything that is built upon existence be essential to us? Okay? It's like saying, for example, I don't own this car. Okay? So if I put new rims on the car, okay, maybe it's not such an example, there would be your rims. So let me give another example. Say, for example, you're in a job where you're making pizzas and you don't own any of the ingredients. Okay? Now, if you put ingredients on top of your pizza that you already don't own, and the ingredients themselves also you don't own, then you don't own any of that complete picture. If our existence itself is not essential to us, then what about everything that is built on our existence? Like, the things that we view as our perfections. So if that is the case, then we must look at the source of all the perfections that we have within us. That our very existence How are we existing from moment to moment? If it's not essential to us, if existence was essential to us, we would exist at every moment. But we don't. Is it the case that we are like wind-up clocks and we're given existence and then we run with it? Or is it the case that existence is a little bit like electricity? Yeah? If you plug a fan into the wall socket, it works. If you take it out, it doesn't work anymore. If our existence is like that, then we, for every single moment of our existence, are fully dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He exists without the need of anybody giving His existence. If we don't own our own life, or if we do not have power to have our own life, then where do we get the perfection of life in every single moment? Every single moment that life is dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is a change in perspective. Why? Because we don't usually see it like that. We see our lives as something we lead until we die. It's like the spoilt child that doesn't realize that they're being looked after. Yeah, they think it's just something that's there. What about our knowledge, our ability to speak, our ability to stand? All of these things we don't own essentially. We need to be given. Okay? And we need to be given continuously. Second after second, millisecond after millisecond. And if we can understand and if we can take this idea really deep into our consciousness, and again, this is why reflection is such a key thing. We need to really think about this and really go into it deeply. If we're able to do that, then we will realize that in every single moment, for every single one of our actions, thoughts, reflections, feelings, moods, we are fully dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As we continue this talk, as I'm talking, as you're listening, there is nothing. It can literally pop out of existence in a single moment. We are fully dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the very air that we're breathing. Yeah? We are fully dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for everything that we have. So now, going back to our example of the person who thinks that they're a good basketball player, like we said before. How do they build up that idea? They build up that idea because, they're practicing and so on and so forth. People praise them, tell them they're so good at it. They get a contract and so on and so forth. Okay? They think that they're a good basketball player out of their own effort. But for every single moment of that effort and for every single improvement that they have, all of that perfection solely comes from Allah. It just comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And like I said to you, it's illustrated sometimes when you lose it. When you lose it, you realize it's not essential. So with this, we can see how essential poverty actually links back to the first discussion we had about gratitude. Okay? The more we deeply understand our poverty, the greater we will find the debt of gratitude. Okay? Because on the one hand, I can thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for nice surroundings. I can thank Him for nice possessions. I can thank Him when things go well. Okay? And on the other hand, I have to realize I have to be more fundamental than that. Yeah? Every single moment of my consciousness and existence comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this then increases that sense of gratitude, yeah, and deepens that sense of love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So inshallah, we will continue talking a little bit about this, and then we're going to move on to the most beautiful topic in the Islamic tradition. It is the topic that hits the heart of every single believer, because it is the source of why they are so committed to this deen, which is the discussion of Tawheed. So we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He accepts this majalis and that He blesses all of us, that He helps all of those people who are oppressed, especially in Gaza, We pray to him that we can be companions of our 12th Imam and that he's always pleased with us. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.